Welcome to a chilly October morning in Colorado. It gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce Dr. Christina Angel. Christina is visiting assistant professor at Metro State University in Denver. She is the convention director at the Denver Comic Con, and she is the vice chair of the board for the Comic Book Classroom. And she's a powerhouse. So, all those roles, Christina, I wonder if you could explain to me, I think I understand how you became an assistant professor at Metro State, but I wonder if you could explain to me how that developed into these manifold roles about comic books.
If you told me 5 years ago that I would be doing this job, I would not have believed you. I was working on my PhD, and for my dissertation, I was actually using a couple of comic books. And what that led me to was I had a friend at Arapahoe Community College, who's the chair of the humanities department, who wanted to teach a class in comics. And so we were talking one day, and he said, "Hey, you should come teach this class in comics." And I was like, well, why the heck not, right? So I went down and decided I would do that. And then my lifelong friend, Frank Romero, was one of the founders for Comic Book Classroom. And he had this idea to give back. He was a lifelong comics guy, collector, reader, worked for a major comics corporation for a long, long time. And he and a couple of friends got together, and they wanted to create an after-school program where kids could come, they could read comics, they could create comics, that he could somehow give back, because he and a couple of friends of his learned how to read from comics. And they thought, we want to give back. We want to think about what that genre, what that medium has done for us. And they decided that in order to fund such an endeavor, they would hold a small Comic-Con. Emphasis on small here. And so in the process of that, they realized that none of them had the credentials to do anything educational. So Frank called me up and said, "Hey, let's have coffee." And that's where it all began. We sat down and had coffee, and he said, "I'm really interested in what you're doing in teaching comics." And we have this other friend, Ilya Kowalchuk, who's a middle school teacher, and we want to bring you guys on to advise us on how to do an educational program. And at the time, I thought, well, the hell, do it. Through a strange sort of series of events, of people coming and going, we developed the Comic Book Classroom project. We launched it. It was really successful. We started with one class. We did a pilot, and we tested out the curriculum that we had written with a couple of my own students. And then we revised it and went on, and we're going to grow by 3. We thought we'd go from 1 to 3. We went from 1 to 15 classes. And that was with a wait list.
What is the curriculum? How does it work?
The curriculum is currently designed for students in the 5th to 8th grade, and it is an after-school program design, but it can be integrated into a classroom. And it goes for 6 weeks. There are 6 units. First one, I don't remember what each of them are specifically, but the general overview is kids learn about reading. They practice reading, and then they learn about how to tell a story, right?
Do they read full comics? Do they read graphic novels? Or is it more like they read a page from one comic and a page from another?
It actually varies, right, depending on what the lesson is. Initially, they read whole comic books. We have class sets of Bone and of Reed Gunther, Owly, things like that. And so we kind of encourage kids to pick what looks good to them or what's interesting to them, whether it be graphic novel or a comic book. And then we teach them about the actual elements of storytelling, right? The storytelling arc,
That's
right?
great.
Building tension, climax, denouement, conclusion. And then from that, we have them write their own stories. They create their own heroes, and then they create their own comic.
That's great. And they illustrate it?
They illustrate it, they color it. Some of them are brilliant.
I bet.
That I've seen are really wonderful.
And how old are these kids?
5th to 8th grade.
So you establish you said you went from 3 to 15, and the program was growing. What happened then?
What happened then was we actually kind of stabilized for a little bit. We've been keeping it at that. But people call us all the time from all over the country. And so what we've done is initially we were teaching all of the classes ourselves with volunteer teachers.
In addition to your day job?
Not us personally, no. We were bringing in volunteer teachers, and we were mining them from education programs, particularly at Metro, because I teach.
You were supplying the curriculum and the teachers.
Yes, and all of the supplies. And all of the supplies for our initial classes were all donated, all the pencils and the paper and all of that stuff. And a lot of the local comics retailers gave us great deals on book sets and libraries and things like that, which was really exciting.
So it was a kind of community effort in a way, a comics community effort.
Very much a grassroots community effort, absolutely.
So then what happens with that, as you said, a small convention?
Well, what happened then is, we started our first comic book classroom class with $0. We had nothing, right? Everything was essentially donated. And that grew rapidly. And then we came around to doing our first convention, which was going to be in 2012. And the first Denver Comic Con was going to be in a ballroom at the convention center, and not even the big ballroom, but the smaller one. And we thought we were going to have a few thousand people, and we would grow it slowly, right?
Right.
We had no visions of this kind of grandeur that it has become. And so we had that small ballroom, and eventually, I think it was scheduled for June 2012, and by the previous November, we had sold out the space.
Sold out the ballroom.
Yes.
That you'd
Yes.
reserved.
Yes, we already had too many people.
How many people are we talking?
I think it was only like 6,000 or 7,000 people. Right?
6,000 or 7,000 fill the ballroom.
Yeah.
Good.
But that was with exhibitors and everything.
Sure.
And so the convention center said, right, you guys
You're at
at capacity. So then we moved to a hall upstairs, one of the big 6 halls that is in the upstairs of the convention center. And it's funny, and we were just terrified that we weren't going to fill it. And I don't know what our expectation was, but I did an interview with Denver Post early on, and I think I said, we're expecting 5,000 people in our first year.
5,000 people seems like a fair amount of people.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I thought we'd be lucky to find 5,000 people who were interested in what we were doing. And that's because I grew up in a generation where, being a nerd wasn't cool. And I think that's changed so much. And all evidence suggests that that's true. And so we moved up to a larger capacity. And a couple of days before our first show, we were even thinking, oh my goodness, we could have 12 or even 15,000 people.
Even.
Right?
So?
And then, one of the other people on our team did an interview with Denver Post and said, if we get 15,000, we're going to be over the moon. Well, the final total was almost 28,000.
In the first year?
In the first year.
Amazing.
It was absolutely packed. It was crazy. And I remember there's these windows up above the convention floor in the mezzanine. And I remember standing up there with my friend Frank Romero, who got me involved in this. And I remember just standing there, and I was just flabbergasted. I was like, I can't believe we did this.
Where did these people come from?
Where did all these people
Right.
come from? And when did the world catch up to us? Right? Because,
Right.
we spent our lives in what we considered a very small world, and we had not realized that the rest of the world had caught up to us.
So you run it again the next year.
Yes.
How many people? What happens next year?
Well, you mean 2013? This last one we had? Yeah, 2013. We doubled everything. We doubled our space. We doubled our capacity. We doubled
100% growth in 1 year.
100%. Actually, it was 120%.
Wow. So how many people are we talking?
It was over 61,000
Wow.
were in attendance in 2013. And again, we grossly underestimated. I did some interviews early on, and I was joking with one person on camera who said, how many people are going to be there this year? And I was like, 50,000, right? And I was being completely facetious because I thought there was no way we were going to have 50,000 people. And then again, we sold out on Friday. Nobody sells out on Friday.
Right.
And especially when it's not even a full day. So we sold out Friday, we sold out Saturday. And when the final numbers were in, I just couldn't believe it.
Would you explain to me what happens at a convention? Like, what is the draw that's bringing 60,000 more than 60,000 people into the convention center?
Well, it's funny because I actually just went to a huge Comic-Con in New York, and there's something really intoxicating about the environment. I compared it, or I likened it to going to Disneyland, right? Yes, there's lots of lines and there's millions of people, but there's just exciting stuff everywhere you look, right? There's things to buy, there's things to see, there's people to meet, there are people in costumes. You can go watch a panel and listen to people from your favorite TV show talk, and
So
crazy.
let me be devil's advocate a little bit.
Sure.
What separates what you do at a convention from a trade show? a trade show about comics. By my understanding, at a trade show, the various producers of whatever the commodity is, they put out their wares, and people involved and interested, either commercially or just interested in what's going on in that particular trade, wander around. And of course, at a trade show, some bigwigs stand up and say, we're going to sell more this year than we've ever sold.
Sure.
So what differs about a comic convention?
Actually, I think a comic convention is not anywhere close to a trade show. Because yes, there are people who are there to sell their wares, but it's so much more about community. It's about belonging somewhere and seeing that there are lots of other people who belong where you belong. It's about, as Will Wheaton says, nerding out, right, for the weekend, because everyone is a nerd at heart, and he defines nerd as someone who's just really, really into something. And because comic conventions are sort of not aptly named, right?
Huh.
I mean, we call it Comic-Con. It's really more like Pop Culture Con, because we have, and most big cons are like this, there's gaming, and gaming is its own culture. There's cosplay, and cosplay is its own culture.
What is cosplay?
Cosplay is costume play, right?
Costume play.
Dressing up as a character. And that character can be from anything, from comics, from cartoons, from movies. I noticed lots of Game of Thrones people lately, So sort of everything that is related to geek culture, which is an ever-widening field, it seems.
This brings up a question, how much then is it about comics? How much is it about TV? How much is it about movies? And why call it a Comic-Con and not a pop culture con?
I think we call it Comic-Con because that's the traditional title, right? The original San Diego Comic-Con was really just about comics, I think, initially. And comics still is the centerpiece. If you go to any show, there's lots of TV and movie stars, there's gaming, cosplay, exhibitors. I think that a large percentage of the con goers are still there because of comics.
So somehow comics orient a much larger world.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
I think because they cover so much, because they really are multimedia, right? When you read a comic, it's a lot like watching a movie or a TV show because there's the implied movement of the frames of a comic. A lot of times there's tie-ins between them, especially more so now, things like Walking Dead, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Serenity, all of those have, Doctor Who, have comic and TV elements. So there's lots of crossover. I think it's all part of the same kind of multimedia experience.
What separates your con from New York or San Diego or what have you?
I'm actually really proud to say that our con is a lot different. Everyone from the top down volunteers their time. And our convention is, we consider it a programming arm of Comic Book Classroom in that it is educationally based. We invite teachers, we give away free tickets to teachers, we invite them to bring their whole classes. We do specific educational programming. As you know, we have a literary convention called Roma Coco that invites scholars in the field to come and present papers. And most importantly to me and to all of us is the centerpiece of our convention floor is the Comic Book Classroom Corral, which this year is growing to be about 8,000 square feet of our floor. We dedicate to the kids, and there's a stage there. And so lots of our children's writers and artists appear there. They do signings or they do workshops for the kids. There's lots of activities for them to do. They can make their own Captain America shields. They can make tribbles. There's a whole bunch of like neat hands-on stuff that we can do. And a lot of the stars are starting to get into it now. Last year, as you also know, William Shatner stopped by the Kids Corral and read Where the Wild Things Are to a room full of really excited kids. That was super fun.
And probably some adults were kind of excited
Actually,
as well.
yes, we kept them out.
You kept them out. That's great.
We specifically had it secured for the kids, and the adults could stand at the perimeter, but it was specifically for young people.
At the center of this convention is literally this reading space. And I guess that kind of is emblematic of your larger sense of both how the con grew up, first being a reading project, and also, I guess, of the culture as well. You said that you felt like the world had caught up with you. What's the path ahead? for comics and for pop culture?
I think, and I'm super idealistic about this because I'm an educator, right? And as educators, I think that we are generally idealistic as a sort. But I see the future, I see it growing continually. And I would like, and I speak for, I think, the group when I say this, I would like the educational part to become a bigger focus as we go on and the con grows bigger. That, yes, while people are coming to see big movie stars, they're also really sure about what we're doing, right? And that we're promoting literacy and reading. Because I think
great.
that pop culture education is where it's at.
Why is pop culture education where it's at?
I think it's been where it's at for a long time. And I've been using it in my classroom since I began teaching 15 years ago. Pop culture, and I think especially geek type culture, is very accepting. You know, anybody could be part of it. I mean, I think that's one of my favorite things about the con world is that you can dress as anything, you can be anything. No one judges you, generally, right? It's a judgment-free zone. You can be as weird as you want, right? Or as normal as you want. And it's everyone. When you go to a comic convention, it's really a cross-section of all ages, all walks of life, and I find that really fascinating. But using pop culture as an educational tool draws readers in. It really does, because it gives them something to connect to that they understand, right? Because we're all part of this sort of popular cultural movement. And I think pop culture expresses much more who we are as people, in the sense that, you know, history tells us facts, right? This happened on this day to this person, or this group of people, or this war happened. I think it's about literature, but I think it extends to pop culture. It tells us who we are, right? It tells us what our hopes and dreams are, what we wish the world were like, what we wish would happen to the bad guys. I mean, all of that sort of constant telling of the same story. It's the human story, and the human story comes out in pop culture over and over and over again. And I think that is what's really fascinating and what gets people really excited. And when I teach things in my own classrooms, and I say, we have to talk about rhetoric, right? But then we watch Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and The Simpsons, they're interested, right? And not only that, but those are some of the best examples of the kind of stuff I'm trying to teach anyway. And so all of that works really beautifully. And when I teach classes, some of my classical courses with comics, I have students email me perpetually before the first day of class. I was just in the bookstore. There are comic books on this list. Yes, I know. And yes, you've got the right list. And, I think it's something that is inviting. Movies and TV and comic books and cartoons they're inviting. They ask us to pay attention. And there's nothing more exciting, I think, for students than to learn that all these things that they already love have real meaning.
And have legitimacy.
Yes.
And that by reading them, we can both understand ourselves, and also, I think what I take from what you're saying is understand perhaps where we're headed.
Yes, and where we've been. Because I think one of the things that's really interesting is that we do tell ourselves the same stories over and over all around the world since the beginning. That there are elements in Gilgamesh, right, that we can see in modern day comics. I find that really, really interesting. Like I said, that we sort of keep telling ourselves the same story because it tells us who we are and what's important to us and what we value. And that doesn't really change. And I think there's something kind of comforting about that. It's also good to teach people that, early cultures aren't primitive, right? That human beings have always been sophisticated. And as a person who teaches medieval literature, I know that you know this, right?
Without a doubt.
It's just because they were writing in the 14th century doesn't mean they were any less sophisticated than we are. Yeah.
Christina, it's been great talking to you. Absolutely wonderful. And I want to say that I salute what you've been doing. You have really made a difference in the Denver community. And I think you have shown the world that comics can be connected to a whole culture that involves commerce and celebrity, but in fact, at its core, can have education. Wonderful work.
Thank you.